We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end...
What will I become?
Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Single Tracks Podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Sara Bresnick. Sara is a cycling coach and founder of Pedal Power Training Solutions, which offers customized training plans plus advice on nutrition, race strategy, and technique. Thanks for joining me, Sara.
You're most welcome. Good to be here.
Tell us, how did you get into coaching?
Well, I was racing professionally, mountain bike, cross country, and my career was winding down. I'm a physical therapist by schooling. So before I set off on my bike racing journey, I was working in outpatient orthopedics, good background in physiology, nutrition, anatomy, et cetera. And I realized after being out racing that I really didn't want to go back to the office. And I was am passionate about cycling, and I really wanted to give back and help others. And my educational background, along with my background racing, sort of gave me a good basis to start a coaching business.
Yeah. Was that something like, as you were starting out in your professional racing career, did you think like, okay, what am I going to do after this? Like, what do you even expect as a professional racer? Like how long that career is going to last?
Well, I think at best, you don't expect anything.
Yeah.
You work hard and you put the work in, and you want to be honestly loving what you're doing. It has to be financially sustainable, which is really hard. And, you take it day by day, year by year, and you figure out what you need to do and what your support is and where you are mentally and physically. And so all that plays into, how long a career is. People do it for a year. People, race. Sometimes I'm like, oh, they're still racing, and that's great. Right. I was about 10 years.
Okay.
From start to finish professionally.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty, it sounds pretty standard too, I think, for a lot of people. Like is that like maybe an average amount that someone would be a professional racer, or it sounds like it varies a ton, maybe.
I think it varies a ton. I think if you're out there, you're doing well, and you have the support, and again, mentally and physically you're there. Yeah. I mean, 10 years is totally reasonable. Yeah. And people get out of it or retire for a lot of different reasons. Want family, financially it's not viable anymore. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, obviously, most of our listeners are not professional racers. Some of us race for fun, sort of locally and stuff. But what are some fitness goals that your clients have that go beyond racing?
Yeah. So what I love about coaching is the variety. And I think a barrier to entry for a lot of potential clients is that they feel that they have to be racing to have a coach. And I would say that's the furthest from the truth. I enjoy coaching professional athletes. I enjoy coaching the 70-year-old who is doing a charity ride, who wants to be comfortable and fit. Yeah. So one of the things I really enjoy about coaching is that variety. My clientele run the gamut of, again, professional athlete to whatever, a goal might be. And a professional athlete's goals are, in my opinion, no more important than the person who is just getting on a bike, who wants to be safe and better and enjoy it.
Yeah. Are you seeing like a shift in your clients, like in terms of what their goals are? Like is racing becoming less important and people are like maybe I don't know, doing like more creative stuff. I mean, we definitely saw that during COVID where people were like, I'm going to Everest, or I want to like, do some FKT or, that sort of thing.
Yeah, good question. So I would say there's a lot more choice than there used to be. I entered the racing scene in 99 as a beginner.
Okay.
And you were either racing on the road or you were racing on the mountain. Some cross, but it was sort of, fringy.
Yeah. There's
Even
a lot
then.
of beer hand ups in that too, right?
Yeah.
Like it's weird that used to be just for fun, but
right. It was sort of
competitive.
The off season thing, you know, and, cross evolved and gravel and Zwift and there's so much out there for a cyclist to be able to participate in. I think it's great. Like the more, the merrier for people to just sort of find what excites them. So yeah, I think the landscape and it has changed. Again, it was like roadie or mountain bike racing, and as a coach, it's fun. It's fun to talk about what a client is interested in doing and what makes them tick. And being able to build a training plan around that, it's way more interesting for me, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Well, you mentioned that some of your clients, they may be like older athletes that are trying to do like a charity ride or just in general, I feel like people are active into a much older age nowadays. So do older athletes need more time to recover between intense workouts?
I'd say on the whole, yes,
okay.
But with the caveat that everyone's recovery is just so different. And maybe, within the same person, a 70-year-old will say, oh, geez, I need more time to recover than when I was 30. But you could compare that 70-year-old to another 20-year-old.
Yeah.
And their recovery could be the same, or the 70-year-olds could be better.
Yeah. Interesting.
So I think person to person, it just varies a lot. And again, as a coach, that's something that, you need to figure out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems like recovery is something that, at least for me, it's kind of a new concept to me, right? Like when I was younger, I just thought like, you got to work out every day and you got to keep training. And now, I've heard a lot more and learned a lot more about like your body needs to recover and you need these breaks. But, now I've got an 11-year-old son who is into running, and I'm wondering like, can he just run every day? Like, is that, or even at that age, like, do you need to recover as much as you do, say, if you're in your 40s or your 50s?
Right. He certainly can run every day. You certainly.
Oh, he wants to.
You certainly could bike every day, right?
Yeah,
but my whole question is, would you have been better if you were recovering more in your 20s?
Right.
So I think, our bodies are awesome, right? And we can get away with so much. When you're younger, you can get away with way more.
Yeah.
Than when you're older. I see this, with myself over and over again, but no matter how old you are, and again, this could be the physical therapist in me talking as well, recovery is so important. And I see these young kids specializing, and I won't go off on too big of a tangent, but, they're specializing in running or specializing in whatever, baseball or whatever it is, and they hurt themselves and they recover at 15, 16, but it'll catch up with them, unfortunately.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. That's good advice. Well, thinking too about like rest and recovery and how that plays into training, what happens if you miss a day or two in a training schedule, and how quickly do your fitness gains disappear? I remember hearing again, like in my 20s, people, somebody said this has got to be a myth, but like for every day that you take off, let's say from running, you lose 3 days of fitness. Like, is that true? Or even the opposite, if you take 3 days off, do you lose a day? Like, is there a formula like that? Or
it's a formula for anxiety, but, so the science will say it takes 10 days to 2 a substantial or a fitness drop.
Okay. And that's like doing nothing, like
doing nothing.
Okay.
And you might feel crappy when you get back on the bike after 10 days, but you know, within a week of getting back on and getting your legs opened up and going again, you're going to be fine.
Okay.
And I tell clients that all the time who don't tell me they're sick and push through stuff because they don't want me to tell them to rest. It's like the sin of omission, right?
Right.
So I feel like, you know, one of my biggest jobs is to tell people to rest. And I'm conservative because I've seen the other end of that. I've seen the injury. I've seen the burnout. and it's hard to dig out from that.
Yeah.
So I would tell people, you know, if you're not feeling good mentally, physically, you're sick, you're just, you know, your kids are bonkers, the dogs, you know, whatever, take the day.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not to say that you don't need to work hard, but I say one workout does not a season make. And it's true. It's true.
Yeah. Well, yeah, imagine too, though, a lot of what you do is when you work with an athlete, you come up with sort of a training schedule, right? You've got like, these are the workouts you need to do this week. Like, how flexible is that though? Like if you miss a day or you want to like sub one thing in for another on a day, like, is that okay? Or like how rigid are these training plans when you put them together? Like, I'm sure they're very well thought out. And so,
right.
Do you want to mess with them or not?
Right. They're well thought out. And at the same time, I would say it depends on where you are, you know, in your season or in your goals or what you're looking to do. If it's January, you know, and you're keying in on June, sure. You know, I tell people in the winter, especially people from climates that are just brutal. Hey, if you can get outside, I don't care what's on the schedule. Like go get a ride in. And we'll adjust later. You know, if you have a race on Saturday and you're screwing with the schedule on Tuesday, that's a different story. Or if you're keying in on an event or, you know, even, you know, whatever that may be. So I'd say the closer you are to something that you're keying in on, the more important the specifics of the schedule are. But again, you know, everything has variables and everything. You know, I say in moderation, and people would say, oh my gosh, when you were racing pro, did you eat ice cream? And I'm like, yes. Did you have a beer? Yes. Was I drinking beer every day? No. Right. But I think we get stuck on being perfect and there's no perfect. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm really fascinated about this idea of like recovery and taking breaks and like how these training plans look for people, because it's hard to like stick with a rigid plan and to be dedicated to like a single sport. I'm also wondering, like, how does an off season work for bike athletes? Like if someone wanted to or needed to for whatever reason, could they like in their off season just not bike and like just run or ski or do something else? Or if you're training for a certain sport, like, do you have to still kind of be doing that even during your off season?
Yeah, good question. So our bodies are very keyed into specificity, right? So you get better at what you're doing. That's not to say that cross training isn't really important. In the off season, you might be doing some more lifting, some maintenance. Are you out, you know, cross country skiing is a great supplement to cycling. Yeah. With the caveat that you still need to be spinning your legs. You need to be, you know, people say, well, I'm going to lift all winter. And I'm like, well, are any, you know, and riding or, well, I'll get back to that later. And sure, I mean, you can do that, but ideally you're on the bike a couple days a week, along with the other stuff. And that can be a Zwift thing, or that could be a fat biking, or that could be, you know, all sorts of different cycling type of activities. But I'd be lying if I was like, nah, no big deal. You know, take 4 months totally off, do go alpine ski and you're going to get back on the bike and it's going to be, fine.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's good advice, because I guess in asking this question, I'm also thinking about people who aren't necessarily athletes or training towards something. They enjoy biking, but they also, say they lived in Colorado and they're, like, well, I'm just going to ski during the winter. Like, it's cold. Biking's not fun. And then I'll just get back to biking. But it sounds like you do lose some of that biking fitness, and maybe it's going to take you a little bit longer to like gain it back. Is that accurate to say?
For sure. And if I have a client who goes out west and skis a lot. Mm-hmm. And he's like, what are we going to do in the winter? And I'm like, okay, well, what's reasonable for you? Mm-hmm. Right. And that's a question. Like, if I'm sitting here saying, bike 6 days a week, whatever. And my client's like, this lady is nuts. I'm not doing my job. Right. So mm-hmm. the important thing is to say, okay, listen, skiing, absolutely. Like, you want to be skinning and you're out in Colorado. Like, of course, mm-hmm. Can you get on the bike twice a week?
Yeah.
I can get on the bike twice a week. Okay. Then let's get you the best workouts for what you want to be doing mm-hmm. twice a week. And that's what we do.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And yeah, you make a good point too. I mean, for a lot of, especially mountain bikers, like, a big part of why we ride is we like being outside. We like being in the woods.
Yeah.
And so something like Zwift is like not appealing at all, but for a lot of people, like, that's kind of your only option. I mean, if it's too cold, if it's snow, if it's whatever, I mean, yeah, you can't just give up on biking and say this is not going to happen. Like, maybe invest in a trainer.
Yeah. And again, I have people like, I'm not going to sit on a trainer. And I'm like, okay, well, let's problem solve it. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. Like, I get it. Like, I don't like sitting on a trainer either. Okay, let's problem solve it. Can you get out in the middle of the day? Can you take a lunch break mm-hmm. when the sun's out? do you have a fat bike? Do you have something you can get on when the roads aren't great? Mm-hmm. And so there's always, there's so many ways to get from point A to point B. And I tell clients that all the time. And my job is to help people figure out the best way to get from point A to. And again, that's the fun part for me. The science of coaching isn't that complicated. And I say that it is, but it's all the other stuff mm-hmm. is so important to bring in.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you make a really good point. And I mean, this is kind of the whole reason that I reached out to you, is because, like, I was reading about your approach online, and a lot of it is about taking people who are very busy and who don't have a lot of time necessarily to devote to training, and helping them find a way to do that. And it sounds like that's part of it. I mean, it's like a time management, but it's also like any hurdle or excuse we're going to throw up and say, oh, well, the weather is bad, kind of as a coach, you're able to find solutions to those problems and help people.
Yeah. And also, I want to keep it fun, right? Like, if someone's saying to me, I can't sit on a trainer. Okay. Like, what do you enjoy doing on the bike? Mm-hmm. Like, how do we make that happen? Because honestly, if you're not enjoying it, you're not going to train. Like, there's going to be no consistency. Right. And I'm not saying you're enjoying, your VO2 intervals when you're doing them. I'm not saying it's not hard work, but the payoff has to be there mentally and physically. And if it's not, your client's not going to keep doing it. And that stinks.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the examples that I thought of people who might work with a coach, want to train for something, but aren't necessarily racing is for mountain bikers, a big deal would be to ride like the Tour Divide. And so let's say that I wanted to ride the Tour Divide. It's, I should know this, 2,700 miles, something like that.
2,700 miles. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's say my goal is to ride the whole thing in a year and a half, in 2025.
Yep.
And I wanted to ride it in 45 days because that's all the vacation I was able to take off. Got to do it in 45 days. If I don't meet my goal. So if I have like a basic level of bike fitness, what's a realistic time frame for training for something like that?
Yikes, that's a big one. That has so much more involved in it than just riding, right? So what are you doing for overnights? Are you
right? Like sleep and
or what are you carrying? Food, what are you doing for
right? Nutrition is a challenge.
Nutrition
for sure
and,
on that.
and do you have support? Are people dropping stuff for you?
Mm-hmm.
So from a fitness standpoint, again, like the fitness is the easy part, in my opinion. So what I would make sure you definitely need a full year. Well, I think it depends on, what's your history with that, right? Are you a bike packer? Have you done these events? I work with someone who does, 1,200 Ks and crazy, overnight stuff. And he's so dialed and meticulous that it makes my job easy because he can just get in there and get it done.
Yeah.
And then you might have someone, if you're saying, I haven't done any bike packing, I'm super fit, but I want to do the Continental Divide. And I'm like, that is awesome. Like, let's figure this out. But you're going to need to do overnights. You're going to need to test your equipment. You're going to need to, I would have people do short trips, leading up to it, 3, 4, 5 nights, out just to make sure. And, physically, mentally, I mean, you need mental fortitude to get through that stuff as well.
Yeah.
So I guess, fitness is important and fitness will come, but you gotta be talking about all the things. And, what are you riding? There's a big debate, drop bar bike, flat bar bike, all sorts of interesting things like that. Bike fit. I'm a bike fitter. That has to be dialed.
Huge.
Yeah. Saddle sores, whatever. Oh, I got a new chamois. I mean, it could be anything at that point. So you need to be so prepared.
Yeah. Is that the kind of thing, one thing that I've thought, and I think I've heard from people who have done, big trips like that, is that you kind of get in shape during the ride. I mean, obviously you don't want to just show up like from zero and try to do it and be like, well, I'll be good after a week or so. But
yeah, I'll work into it.
But yeah, is that a thing? Like, does your body adapt that quickly that you actually are able to like kind of get into a rhythm with it?
It does. And again, if you've done those type of events before, you have a lot more leeway to ride into something. If you haven't, or, you're moving from a different discipline into something, really long like that, you need to train your body a little bit to be able to go day in and day out. So yeah, the lead-in can just be so different based on riding history. What I've found with coaching, which is really interesting, is intensity helps endurance. And sometimes that sort of feels backwards to people.
Yeah.
And people who do really long endurance sport, they don't go hard because they're just they're like, well, I'm not going hard when I'm doing the thing because I'm doing the thing day in and day out.
Right.
So I'm not working at a threshold or a VO2. I'm just riding. And that's true. But what I've found over the years is that if you train intensity, your ability for the endurance will be so much better. And I've done this with multiple clients and they're flabbergasted.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, I didn't think I needed to go hard because I'm doing the Tour Divide and I can't go hard. Right. Because you're riding so much. But the going hard beforehand, like the hard group rides, the zone 5, it brings everything up with it. And it's really cool.
Yeah.
To see that.
Yeah. I feel like as I've gotten older, I've definitely, gotten away from those like intense workouts and just focused on like, okay, can I go farther than I did last year or whatever? And I mean, I guess in some ways it's because it's easier. I mean, it doesn't hurt as much as those like intense workouts. And also I think, I have told myself like, well, I don't need that intensity. I just need this like endurance, this like infinite endurance.
Right.
But that's great to know that you can build that through intensity. Yeah.
And it's funny because I don't race anymore, but I love riding. I ride a lot. I do events. I do rides to pie, right? Like, there's a pie stop in 5 miles. And then after that, there's the ice cream sandwich and, the whole thing. And I love that kind of riding, but I find if I can make, and again, the hard stuff is hard. We have a saying, my friend and I, hard work is hard. And it is. And I avoid it too. But when I find that I do some of it, especially in the off season, it's snowing here still.
Yeah.
And if I get on a trainer and go hard, do a hard workout for a short period of time, it really helps the endurance, like when I get back on the bike. And so I would tell people not to shy away from it, to sort of hit it head on and get some of that in.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Well, so tell us, what is like one of the biggest challenges that people face when it comes to improving their fitness? Is there like one thing that stands out, or like, I don't want to say excuses, but you're probably in the excuse business of like people being like, well, I can't because whatever. So like, what's like a common thing?
Yeah. I think that the biggest hurdle for people is time. And when I was racing professionally, I had time. Like, I didn't have a family to toggle. I was working, but I had the ability to work per diem 15 hours a week. When I was home, this and that, I wasn't at a job 40 hours. I wasn't commuting. I wasn't coming home to, a shitstorm,
Right.
which, and I didn't have to get on the trainer at 6 a.m. before work. So I give my clients so much credit for carving out time in their lives to get it in. And if you can have the motivation to do that and be consistent with it, you're gonna see gains, and you're gonna, reach those goals. But it's hard. It's hard to find that time.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the fastest people that I know, and I don't race, just people I ride with who are fast and fit, and that, I'd love to be as fast as them. A lot of them, they're just as busy as me. I mean, they've got jobs and families and everything, but it seems like a lot of them find ways to like fit in their workouts. So they'll like commute to work on a bike, or while their kids at soccer, they'll go for a run around the field or whatever. So yeah, I mean, are there like hacks like that people can do to find more time?
Yeah, there are definitely hacks, and you sort of have to find what works for people. And I definitely give, suggestion based on what's worked for people in the past. I mean, I've been at this, I always lose track, but 15 plus years, and over that time, you find things that work for people and then maybe suggest that to other people. But, some people say, I need to do this in the morning, because if I don't do it first thing, my life is going to become chaotic, and it's not going to happen. I have people, I'm like, hey, can you get out? You have an hour for lunch? Can you like do it then? Like, can you, or book an hour and a half and work a half hour later? Can you do it on a commute? Sometimes group rides hold people accountable because you're meeting people, and they're hard, they can be hard. So you get like a good workout in. So it can be any of these things, but you have to try to work through that with people.
Yeah. It sounds like too, I mean, especially that example of doing it first thing in the morning. I mean, it comes down to prioritizing it. Right. And so, if we find that we're like, well, I don't have time, then it's like, well, then maybe it's not as important as like all these other things that you want to do. And that's okay. Right. Like, maybe for people, they need to realize that like maybe winning that race, I mean, you've got a job and a family and kids and all this stuff. Maybe that's like not your top priority. And so, do people come to that conclusion sometimes? Sometimes,
and, sometimes there's a real talk, it's like, okay, I get it, but I don't think you want to be paying me for this right now because, is there something, I always ask, is there something I can do to help you? Like, is there something that you can think of that to get this higher on the priority list or to help make this happen? And sometimes people are like, yeah, actually. And sometimes like, I just, it's just not going to happen right now. But the thing that I find consistently across the board is that, I'll ask, I have an intake. And I try to get, a bunch of information from people. And time after time, I'm like, how much time do you think you can devote to riding.
Mm-hmm.
And people give me huge numbers.
Oh, really? They're like, oh, I can only do like 20 hours a week. And you're like, whoa.
I'm like, yeah, I have 20 hours. And I'm like, oh my God, 20
Wow.
hours. Like,
Yeah.
you know, and very rarely, every so often, someone's like, I have 5 to 6 hours.
Yeah.
But mostly like people grossly overestimate how much time they think they have. And for good reason, you know, they're optimistic and
Right.
excited and,
Yeah.
you know, but yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, you also mentioned when you were a professional athlete, you felt like you had plenty of time, which kind of surprises me. Like I assumed even the professional athletes would say that a lot of them feel pressed for time because again, like, I mean, you still have to live your life and you have friends and you got to do the laundry and like, you know, all kinds of stuff. And today I'm sure a lot of it is like, I got to do social media for my brands and I got to do this or that. Do you think some of that is hindsight now looking back, like your life now compared to back then is probably more busy, but even as a professional athlete, do you think, I mean, obviously they don't have infinite time either, right?
No one has infinite time for sure. Being a professional athlete is inherently selfish. And I say
Yes.
that not as a, you know, I was that. And it's fine, but you have to be.
Mm-hmm.
In order to be that good, you come first and what you need to do comes first. And I would say I felt like I had time at that point because I knew I needed it. And the one of the things that people again underestimate is not recovery from cycling, but just recovery from life. And professional athletes are really good at that. A good professional athlete rests. They take naps during the day. They get 8-10 hours of sleep. They, you know, and I mean, I was never great at that, admittedly, you know, but I'm like, oh, where's so-and-so? Oh, they're taking a nap. I'm like, a nap? And because you have to. And, you know, the person who's not doing that professionally, that's, you know, struggling with the job's stressful, the kids are a disaster, like the whole thing, people underestimate. They're like, well, they compartmentalize, right? Like, well, I shouldn't be tired.
Yeah.
If I could tell you, you know, how many times I shouldn't be tired. I'm like, yes, but you are tired.
You are human. Yeah.
And not necessarily from the bike, right? So you got to take all that into account. So yeah, it's tough. Again, like for a professional athlete, that's their job and they don't have the other jobs. Right. They don't have the other things. So, you know, again, we're human and we have a lot on our plates. And there are very few professionals out there, but there are a lot of people who want to ride their bike faster and are good cyclists. And so again, like the job of a coach is to figure out like how to make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. Well, I imagine that most of your training and coaching is virtual in that like you're having phone calls, you're meeting online, sending emails. You're not like at the track with a stopwatch, you know, like babysitting people on their workouts.
In my tracksuit.
Yeah. That's the image I have. But as a trainer, a virtual trainer, essentially, like what can you learn from a client's workout data just by looking at it? Like, can you look at someone's heart rate or their power? Like, what does that tell you in terms of like their progression and what they need to do next and that sort of thing?
Yeah, a lot. Good question. So the technology has gotten so much better over the years, right? It's like, okay, well, what do you have? Are you on Strava? Are we on Training Peaks? Are we on Garmin Connect? Are we on, you know, whatever? And, you know, the big things I look at over time are power in relation to heart rate. Cadence is a huge one that so many people overlook. Are you know, where's your cadence at?
Yeah. Because a lot of people, their cadence, I'm guessing, is too slow, right? Like, is that the mistake a lot of us make? Especially
newer riders. Yeah, I work real hard to make sure people are getting to be as efficient as possible.
And as mountain bikers too, like if we could talk about cadence a little bit, like that's not something that we usually pay attention to. But again, like the more I'm learning, the more it makes sense that like if you're spinning in a gear that's too hard, your cadence is going to be lower. You're more prone to injury for starters, right? And are you working harder than you have to be? Is that kind of the issue?
Yeah. So the sciencey answer is that you want to rely on your cardiovascular system for anything that's of any length.
Okay.
And your neuromuscular system, which is, your muscles, your joints, they'll fatigue quicker. And so as you get better trained, your cardiovascular system, that you want that to be trained to work for the long haul. And when people are new, they don't have that cardiovascular strength. So they rely on their muscular strength because it's there then. But there's no longevity to that. You can't ask your muscles to work at a 60 RPM for hours, right?
Right.
You want to train the cardiovascular system to take that load and let your legs spin.
Okay.
And that's sort of the short answer. But on top of that, for sure, you don't want to destroy your knees and your joints. Mountain biking is interesting in that you need those bursts of power, and you need more so than if you're a road racer. You need to be able to push up and over. You need that muscular strength, and there are ways to do that on the bike through low cadence. And that is really important. But you want that default cadence to be higher.
Yeah. What is there like a magic number, or is it like different for everybody?
I mean, there's a magic number-ish. I'd say it's around 90 RPM.
Okay.
And the science supports that that's an efficient cadence. As you get higher, you jack your heart rate up for no power gain. So you're actually just overworking your cardiovascular system.
Yeah.
As you get lower, you're overworking your neuromuscular system.
Okay.
But within that 90, obviously people are different.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there other sort of data points that you look at beyond sort of the big three, maybe heart rate, power, cadence, or those kind of the three main ones? Yeah.
It's funny. I feel like its power has become really accessible to people. When I first started, it was, what was it? SRM? Was that the one?
It sounds like
that was
something.
Like the only, it was like the power meter. It was like $4,000, or something. Or power tap, there was the wheel. And it was not accessible technology. It was expensive, didn't work great. Now it's like, I just throw the pedal on or the crank or the whatever.
Yeah. I was just thinking e-bikes have that built in now too. They have power and cadence, which most mountain bikers you'd have to obviously add that onto a bike afterward. But if you're buying an e-bike, I think it has that on there. Yeah.
I don't know. I'll take your word for it.
I mean, right. I don't know if that helps. I don't know if you're training on an e-bike, but at least you have it.
Maybe. Yeah. But as power became commonplace, people sort of lost track of heart rate. And I find that interesting because power and heart rate, how they relate to each other, tells you a lot. Right? If you're able to work at a higher power at a lower heart rate, theoretically you're improving, right?
I see.
And so I'll start working with clients and they'll be like, oh yeah, the heart rate monitor. I don't know. I had one and lost it. And I'm like, well, you need that. So yeah, how those two interplay actually tells you a lot.
Yeah. Do you need, I mean, a lot of us we have a Garmin watch or we have an Apple Watch, which has heart rate. And my understanding is that those are maybe not as accurate as like a chest mounted one or whatever. Does it matter? Like, or are you just trying to get like a basic idea of heart rate?
I mean, you want it to be accurate. You don't want it to be dropping out. Yeah. The chest straps, I feel like, are the gold standard in that they just work pretty well. I know there are wrist and like armband heart rate ones now that I don't feel like work quite as well. But the technology also has gotten complicated. Now you have the client with 4 different power meters.
Whoa. And like, which one is right?
Right. Well, that's the problem. They don't understand that they're not all likely going to tell you the same thing. So from a coaching perspective, I was like, oh God, like what one are you using? And are they egregiously off? Are they close? That you have the meter on the Zwift, you have the meter on the crank, then you have the meter on the other bike, then you have, and it really gets muddy, like really muddy. So yeah.
Interesting. Well, speaking of data, you're also a bike fitter and you're certified in biomechanics. So I'm curious if you can tell can you tell remotely if someone has a bad bike fit by looking at their training data or maybe just talking to them and asking them like sort of how they feel on the bike?
Yeah, I don't think data is going to tell you that per se, because unless, someone gets a bike fit and their data gets egregiously different, from before to after, but just working with a client and seeing data, isn't really going to tell you much about their fit. So their fit would be by talking to them. Okay. Geez, I feel real uncomfortable on this bike. Or, wow, the last time I had a fit was like 10 years ago. Four saddles, 10 years, 3 bikes. So I never, push it on people, but oftentimes, I'll ask the question, hey, when was your last bike fit? Maybe that's something to explore.
Yeah. Yeah. But because you're remote, obviously a bike fit is something that generally needs to be done in person. I know people are working on apps or things where they try to do that like remotely. But so let's say that you have a client, they're not local, and you say you need to get a bike fit. Like, I know there are like different systems too out there where like bike fitters have different priorities or ways of looking at things. Is there like a system that you prefer or does any of that matter?
None of that matters if the fitter isn't good, which is tough. I try to see people, whoever I can see. And if not, I try to get a good referral. I try to ask around. The technology is only as good as the fitter. So a retool, a specialized, blah, blah, blah. You can go on and on with the systems. They're only going to ever be as good as the fitter. And, personally, I work with a level, a plumb bob, a tape measure.
Wow. No lasers? No lasers involved?
Not often. Not often. I've been doing it for so long and I was trained at, the physical therapy aspect, the biomechanics. It's so important to have a fitter that can see, what's going on. And the computers and the fit systems can be dangerous in that sometimes they spit out numbers, and what's that based on? And what are you looking at? Like someone will say, gosh, I could talk about this all day, but someone will say, well, what's my knee angle look like? And I'm like, well, your knee angle looks great, but your ankle's terrible. So like you have to be able to look at the whole chain, like what's going on at the hip, the knee, the ankle, the toe, so you can never take one thing sort of as a standalone. And a good fitter's great. A bad fitter's terrible, so it's tough.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting or good that you said too, that you can't just look at one piece of it. Cause I'm sure for a lot of people, it's like, oh, my shoulder hurts. So it must be something with my handlebar and I'll just make a change there, where a good fitter can tell you how that's related to something else or the whole picture, in terms of getting that resolved.
Yeah. The interplay, is just, it's infinite, right? They're infinite sort of variables and points to look at. And, so a good fitter can sort of hone in on what, an ache or a pain or an injury might be coming from and sort of try to go from there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you've really touched on this a lot. It sounds like as a trainer, you're there in terms of like offering technical support and advice, but also emotional support. So what's sort of the split between the two? I mean, do you see yourself as more of a mental coach or more of a physical coach, or does it depend on the client maybe?
It definitely depends on the client, but the emotional component can never be underestimated because if a client isn't there emotionally, the physical will never come. And it doesn't matter how good the training plan is. It doesn't matter how much time you've put into that. The client has to be there mentally and motivated and excited. And that's why, I have people contact me and they'll say, I want to coach, but I'm really afraid you're going to tell me I can't do ABC that I enjoy on the bike anymore. And I'm like, I'm not going to tell you that.
Yeah.
I'm going to have you do ABC that you enjoy, but you also have to do D, so again, you've got to figure out what makes someone tick and why they want to bike and why they enjoy it. And you can't take all that away and say, well, you need to, if you sit on the trainer 4 days a week and you do your tempo and you do your threshold, and then we do some this and that, and you're going to be really good. And that's true, but they're not going to do it or ride, and they're going to hate riding, and they're going to want to throw their bike away. And someone can again get from A to B doing the things that they enjoy, along with, sometimes I say you got to eat your broccoli.
Yeah.
You can do the thing, but you got to also do this other thing. And if the client doesn't buy into the program, I was going to say this before, I think I thought about it. But if the client doesn't buy into the program, then they're not going to do the program.
We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end,
what will I become?
Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
Yeah. Well, so how long then does it take for you to get to know someone before you're able to come up with a plan for them? Or, because I imagine people come to you all the time and they have really similar goals. They're like, I want to, do this 100-mile bike race. And I'm sure you've got a, file cabinet full of plans, and you can be like, okay, 100-mile bike race, here it is. But it sounds like that's not going to work. You need to know the person and get to know them and figure out a plan for them. So how do you do that? And how quickly can you do that?
Well, I do not have a file full of plans, but
you can look them up online. There's Training Peaks. There's all this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely look something up for you. Yeah. I try to, I talk to each client, and then I have an intake form, and I try to, get some info there, and, try to, start with those things and build a couple weeks and say, hey, how does this look? And then, you're building a couple more weeks. But honestly, I tell people I typically do, a 3-month commitment up front because, and I say flat out, we gotta figure out how to work together, and what's going to work and what's not going to work. And I feel like, the 3 months is sort of a good initial time frame. It doesn't feel like someone's roped in for, ever, but it's the time that I feel like I need to get someone up and running.
Yeah.
So I have the 3-month initial.
Yeah, that makes sense. Even that seems kind of short. There's people I've been biking with for many years, and I'm just now figuring out what makes them tick, and what kind of rides we're going to have fun doing together, and what kind of rides I don't want to do with them. So yeah, that's a big part.
Yeah. Certainly you keep learning, but I feel like that's sort of a good starting point of okay, we need a 3-month relationship, before we sort of reevaluate and kind of see where we are.
Yeah. So one final question I want to ask you is what's one easy step that everybody can take to start improving their cycling fitness, whether they're working with a trainer or not? Yeah.
Consistency. Get on the bike, figure out what you enjoy doing, and get out there and start pedaling. And don't let perfection get in the way of good, right?
Yeah.
Some people get really bogged down with something being perfect to the point that it can paralyze them to do anything.
Yeah.
So get out there and ride.
Yeah. Awesome. I think we can all do that, especially now that it's spring. It's great.
I
Good
know
timing.
it's spring somewhere. Again, I'm looking at snow, but I'm, up in the wilds of the north.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, at least the calendar says it's spring. Well,
it does. It's coming.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us. I learned a ton, and I think I'm more motivated than I was at the start of this too. So thank you. That was awesome.
Perfect. Job well done.
Yeah. Well, you can connect with Sarah, find out more on her website, pedalpowercoaching.com, and we'll have that link in the show notes. That's all we've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week.